I'm just going to turn the lights off because all the images I have for the Lumia is quite dark. Lumia is quite hard to record. I'm just going to turn it off. Hi, my name is Sren Kim, and I work at the University of the West of Scotland, and this particular Lumia project is part of my PhD at Royal College of Art in animation program. This paper aims to introduce Lumia and discuss its characteristics as an abstract art, the concept of hyperobjectivity, and adaptation of the concept into my current research. Lumia emerged in the early 20th century in the United States, and its pioneer Thomas Wilfred claimed Lumia to be the 8th major art form after architecture, sculpture, painting, poetry, music, drama, and dance. In principle, Lumia was not limited to Thomas Wilfred's art practice. For instance, in his journal article from 1947, Light and the artist acknowledged Van Perrin as another pioneer of Lumia. Perrin called his drawing technique Lumia, where he depicted the appearance of a projected colored light, and he began using his Lumia technique from as early as 1912, which predates Thomas Wilfred's practice, which arguably predates Wilfred's Lumia, as Wilfred did not start his Lumia works until after his emigration to the United States from Denmark. And that's the piece, Opus 161, and it's untitled. Commonality between their practices are their direct use of light into their art and the coinage of the term Lumia. Unlike Perrin, as you can see from his impressionistic style, Wilfred's light was much more abstract than light representing itself as a physical light. This is Wilfred's description of his experience with Lumia. A circle of columns faintly glowing in the dark, in the light, and reflected from a metal instrument in front of a large white screen on the stage. The artist seated before the keyboard has already pressed some of the buttons, and powerful projection lamps are burning within the instrument. The large white screen comes to life. Out of the darkness, faint waves of ultramarine pulsate through blue to turquoise and back to ultramarine, then again through blue to turquoise and back, this time stronger, until the waves gather into a cloud of deep violet and float away into space. Yes, space. The screen has ceased to exist, and its frame has become a casement opening on infinite space. Wilfred's space resembles the iconographical representation of the infinite by the early 17th century English physician Robert Flood. The same small writing appeared on each side, as you can see, the foresight of the black square is translated as "and so on to infinity." The color of black conveys a pure depth of space as opposed to a color of an image. Wilfred's space resembles the, and Wilfred uses, hold on, sorry. So Wilfred's use of the infinity resembles what Pierre Mondrian defined as the non-color, which represent architectural values than the color properties. And this is Wilfred's diagram, which goes deeper with his perception of space. This analyzes space into the first field and second field. The first field represents the physical space between the spectator and the screen. And he described the second field as the invisible remainder of space. The deepest perceivable depth for spectator is vanishing point, as you can see in that small rectangular. And same as Flood's small writing on each corner, it means continuum. In his article Composing in the Art of Lumia, Wilfred stated, "It may seem superfluous to chart minor steps from the window plane back towards the spectator, but in the near future we shall project Lumia compositions stereoscopically. The principle has been perfected." Wilfred pursued immersion and depth of the infinite by inviting spectators to another realm. Despite most of his surviving Lumia works conveying the unearthly realm, which he described it as one which so far has found expression only in music and poetic writing, Wilfred suggested Lumia could materialize a dance hall, a crowded city street, a great suspension bridge, a primeval forest, and it was confirmed in his last radio interview in the year he died, in 1968. And that's the quote. The titles of his early Lumia compositions, such as Opus 31, Enchanted Forest, 1924, and Opus 33, Machine, 1924, and Opus 56, City Windows, from 1934, hence how he himself pursued presenting the earthly realm as well. However, it is evident that Wilfred only focused on piloting his space liner through a new and unearthly realm, according to his writing. I argue that Wilfred searched for new and unearthly realms, and it is not a representation of the space, but an absolute space. The meaning of image between producing an earthly realm and a new realm is fundamentally different, and it is due to the dualism of light being objects and space. As you can see from the Guy Brett's quotation, Guy described Dan Flavin's use of fluorescence tube as to bisect the space and also charge it. The space is lit, which is in a sense a perception of a gently pervasive climate rather than of form. While the former relies on ourselves as a perceptual agency, meaning the earthly realm, but the latter, which is unearthly, it is relayed through another agency, which is light, in the case of Dan Flavin, but also Thomas Wilfred. However, learning about how his new artistic practice, which he referred to as projected scenery, so that's a derivative aspect of his practice, and he even wrote a book, emerged from the 1949 in theater, could suggest that the direction of pursuing an unearthly realm has taken a separate way outside Lumia, or perhaps launched a new branch of Lumia at large. Prior to projected scenery, Wilfred designed the lighting for Ibsen's play The Vikings and Hegeland in 1927 and 28, and in 1929, as you can see, and he created a projected mural work for Ballroom, the Bal Tabarin at Hotel Sherman, by installing 21 Lumia projectors, also known as clavilux. And please note, Wilfred referred his Lumia instrument as clavilux from this point on. From his early Lumia works for the earthly realm to lighting design for the play and the Lumia mural, and eventually to the launch of projected scenery, Wilfred extensively explored the first field, which we saw from his analysis of space. Projecting an earthly image onto screen or a set invites spectators. and stage lighting deepens the depths between spectators and a painted scenery, the first field. Wilfred did not specify the relationship between Lumia and projected scenery. At the same time, despite he began projection mapping as early as 1929, using the multiple projectors, somehow he's not recognized fully as the father of projection art. And perhaps the recognizing his branch of scenery, projected scenery, might open up another possibility of research. American artist Roger Ferragallo, in his artist page, recalls his visit to the mural with Thomas Wilfred in 1952. Wilfred walked me upstairs to the control room that looked down on a massive oval ballroom surrounded by a colossal 150-foot surround screen. He proceeded to play his large clavier system at his keyboard as if an organist. I was astounded when the entire screen was suddenly flooded with pure light and color forms all in motion. I felt an air of silent mystique as he presented his remarkable color form opus performance of undulating, changing, and fusing luminal surreal forms and shapes that majestically encircled the entire oval screen. It was breathtaking, life-exchanging, and blew my mind. Wilfred's Lumia mural projected the unearthly realm, unlike his plan found in the Yale University's archive, which we saw earlier. But it importantly enters into the 360-degree surround view of a new world, and it suggests the next step for the Art of Lumia, which Wilfred might have overlooked. Oliver Grau, in his book Virtual Art from Illusion to Immersion, introduces Bild, a German word for picture or image. With its etymological Germanic root Bild, its meaning refers less to pictoriality and more to living essence. On objects of power in which resided irrational, magical, even spiritual power that could not be grasped or controlled by the observer. Elimination of the first field distinguishes Lumia from projected scenery, but as seen in the Lumia mural, Lumia is not limited to a flat projection screen or a singular type of system, but the manifestation of virtuality, perhaps immersion without being. Immersive art takes advantage of human desire for a settlement in seeing. As Grau stated, even 6-year-olds can distinguish between reality and as-if world, but we instinctively cooperate to be part of that scene. Then, how can an imagery work like Lumia sustain immersion without being against spectators' desire for settlement? In order to answer that question, I'm introducing a new term, hypervisible, that exists between visible and invisible from phenomenological context. For the visible, this is from Molly Ponti. For the visible, present is not in time and space, nor of course outside of them. There's nothing before it, after it, about it, that could compete with its visibility. And yet, it is not alone, it is not everything. To put it precisely, it stops up my view, that is, time and space extend beyond the visible present, and at the same time, they are behind it, in depths, in hiding. The visible can thus fill me and occupy me only because I who see it do not see it from the depths of nothingness, but from the mist of itself. I, the seer, am also visible. So it highlights the Molly Ponti's interest of creating the much more intimate relationship between the objects or the image and the seer themselves. Molly Ponti's it expands his phenomenological inquiry onto multitudes of senses, as the seers become also objects, as we just saw, and situate ourselves within the being we are dealing with, instead of looking at it from the outside, or what amounts to the same thing, what we have to do is put it back into the fabric of our life, attend from within to the essence, analogous to that of my own body, which opens it to itself and opens us upon it, and which, in the case of the essence, is the essence of the speaking and the thinking. In contrast to the embodied image perception, the aesthetics of Lumia reminds us of the irreducible inaccessibility by witnessing the image injecting our body in the scene. This returns to the early discussion of fluids and so on to infinity. And Merleau-Ponty left a working note in 1959 on this. It must be what exceeds us, the infinity of openness and endlessness, infinity of life forward, the world he imagined as a potential horizontal world, and not infinity of idealization. In hypervisible, the infinity exists between before and behind the image. And I have decided to use hyper to coin a new term to show my acknowledgement of Timothy Morton's concept of hyperobjects. Morton developed the idea from a speculative realist perspective, which makes a counter argument to the phenomenological tradition. In contrast, I'm approaching this from a phenomenological perspective. Morton defined hyperobjects as things that are massively distributed in time and space relative to humans. And his examples of hyperobjectives include a black hole, oil-filled solar system, nuclear materials, and plastic bags. The common characteristics of hyperobjects are the following. Viscosity. The hyperobjects stick to being that are involved with them. Therefore, it is not one's choice. Non-locality. And any local manifestation of a hyperobject is not directly the hyperobjects, meaning what happens is only partial and derivative and is not the thing itself. Temporal undulation. The hyperobjects involve profoundly different temporalities than the human scale ones we are used to. Therefore, our concept of time is not applicable in this case. Phasing. Hyperphasing is, again, these are hyperobjects occupy a high-dimensional phase space that results in their being invisible to humans for stretches of time. Image and seeing cannot explain things. Like, we'll not be able to see the four-dimensional space as a three-dimensional beings. Interobjectivity, they exhibit their effects interobjectively. That is, they can be detected in a space that consists of interrelationships between aesthetic properties of objects. So we are only detecting the interrelationships only through the image, or we are not actually seeing the imagery representation of the thing itself. And that's the last, the characteristics of hyperobjects. Inside the Clavilux machine, one finds multiple reflectors, filters, as you can see on the right, filters and transparent objects, and motors. What is presented on the screen is the dynamics of relationality between those components. Clavilux is an anti-imaging machine and works to present interrelationships, not the scene of objects. It is how Lumia differentiates itself from puppet theater. It only reveals the moments of contacts between the components through the reflection of light. So it is interobjective. The image of Lumia is derivatives of hyperobjects. It is viscous as it emerges then enters. So it emerges then enters. And non-local as we only see part and it is temporarily undulated. as time is collapsed through reflection of light. And also the collapsed time makes the emerging images phasing. Morton critiques the infinity of life worlds found from the phenomenological discourse by stating hyperobjectives are real whether or not someone is thinking of them. Indeed, for some reasons given in this study, hyperobjects end the possibility of transcendental leaps outside physical reality. Hyperobjects force us to acknowledge the eminence of thinking to the physical, but this does not mean we are embedded in a life world, is Morton's argument. However, I'm concerned with how Morton can arrive at definitive real when we are only capable of seeing the potential states of hyperobjects, which then have been temporarily undulated and viscous and in natural and interobjective way. In my study, I'm adapting Morton's concept of into hyperobjectivity and hypervisible. Hyperobjectivity is a mode of discovery where one sees a potential state of an object that are incomprehensibly distributed in time and space relative to humans. The essence of hyperness is the incomprehensibility as a human. So it should include incomprehensible objects in a micro scale, but also in an enclosed and the masked context as well, whether spatially or temporally. In the 360-degree surround setup, Lumia abstract its image in the mode of hyperobjectivity by using its mega scale. But perhaps it can be achieved in a smaller scale like this, when the system needs to be masked. It is no longer accessible, and what is shown on the screen is incomprehensible. In fact, the scale could be hyper, but by being too small for human. By using a lensless SLR, I can document kinetic images of Lumia without any screen. This is an excerpt of my refractography work, scene 2, 8 minutes. My Lumia experiments so far have been copying the mask system, scaling up through projection mapping, then microscaling with refractography. My new Lumia experiment moves on to a virtual reality, and I strongly believe that VR offers the most hyperobjective space for Lumia. In this, I use a ground noise to mask the absence of sound and focus on multiple vanishing point and counterpoints. And this is, I can share the link, it's unlisted on YouTube, it's a VR competition. So when you're using the headset, you are inside the entirely enclosed Lumia competitions. Hyperobjectivity in the Art of Lumia is a method of abstraction, and it fulfills Mondrian's definition of abstraction as intensification, but not merely as simplification. Lumia's method of abstraction demonstrates how to hyperobjectify Mondrian's non-color, and is less earthly than Alexander Calder's. In the end, Wilfred proposed an alternative method of abstraction for the tradition of visual music. His admiration for Bach and his music might have led this discovery of visual counterpoints. Whether he stated or not, his compositions are the evidence. By multiplying the Wilfred field diagram into a VR sphere, I have observed the multiple vanishing points, and where overlaps there are contrapuntal opportunities. In other words, the human discovers the beauty out of hyperobjective phenomena like astronomy photographs. In this spherical dimension, the first field has become completely minimized, but now it reveals the third field, and that we can only detect by seeing vanishing points and counterpoints. Hyperobjectivity in the Art of Lumia is a method of abstraction, and by deconstructing the original model of Wilfred's Lumia theory, we begin to see the missing gap. For Wilfred, Lumia composition was an illustration of an object created by light, as his theory is more of summary of his development phases. He approached it in a two-dimensional way, but then he observed the 3D and realized that 3D was not as straightforward as he noticed. The movement was more of an orbit. Furthermore, the vision was restricted. It is evident that Wilfred produced the visible scenes and objects with light. Perhaps his Opus 91 abstract, The Firebird, shows Wilfred's ultimate goal through Lumia is an imagery representation. And this is my last slide. Sorry. Here is my theory of Lumia method as a method of abstraction, and I'm proposing this mode of seeing as a seeing out with, as you can see. Emmanuel Aloa categorizes seeing into three modes. See as, to recognize an image as a referent. See in, to focus on configuration and materiality of an image. And see with, to actively observe and examine an image in an embodied mode. In contrast, see out with is to observe when an image is incomprehensible and inaccessible. Hyperobjectivists are argued as irreducible real things in Morton's hypothesis, but as I discussed earlier, I have a skepticism over how one can comprehend fully hyperobjects. Instead, my research considered the mode of sensing hyperobjects as a mode of abstract seeing for the artist and spectators, and has questions what the hidden intentionality of Lumia could have been, and perhaps it could have given Wilfred a greater chance of further disseminating his art for others to follow, if the hidden method of abstraction was better established and sooner. In my opinion, hyperobjects can be constructed as the very foundation of their existence is the incomprehensibility and indeterminacy. Hence, hyperobjectivity should be considered as a method for various art. And I strongly believe that hyperobjectivity can also explain why historically Lumia was compared to music, and Wilfred himself compared it to music and poetry. Thank you.